Through the many theories about Anakin's birth, from the conception by midichlorians to the experiment of the Sith, one thing that cannot be disputed was the potential within Anakin. Even before his birth, the prophecy of the Chosen One was a legend, and could only be fulfilled from one born by the Force. It is said that the will of the Force acted to conceive this being of midichlorians, but as he and Shmi Skywalker were quickly moved to Tatooine, the Jedi failed to detect the Force-sensitive outside of the Republic's territory. Their Anakin's destiny could have never been fulfilled but for one chance encounter. When Jedi Master Qui-Gon Jinn landed on Tatooine, the rebellious Jedi would sense Anakin's potential, and after taking a blood sample, he had a midichlorian count that exceeded every Jedi. Thus began Anakin's journey to Jedi greatness, but for all his potential, he could have been even greater. When Anakin, now Darth Vader, encountered Obi-Wan on Mustafar, his overconfidence not only cost him his limbs, but also had psychological after effects that he never truly recovered from. Whilst his new armour provided him with an isolated space, cut off from the rest of the galaxy where he could focus on the Force, he could never unlock his true powers. But what if he had reached his true potential? What kind of Force feats could he achieve? The story does not begin on the volcanic shore of Mustafar, but on the realm of Mortis. As Anakin freed Ahsoka and Obi-Wan from the son and the daughter, their father declared Anakin to have passed the test to be the Chosen One and asked him to take his place. Despite having just displayed the peak of his Force abilities by taming the children, Anakin and the Jedi initially declined the offer, but the words of the previous night are still in the mind of Anakin. The father had told him that the Sith were among those who were seeking to exploit the power of the Ones, and Anakin knew he could not allow it to fall into enemy hands. Both Ahsoka and Obi-Wan did not trust the Ones, and implored Anakin to leave the planet, but Anakin felt the weight of the words of the father, and as much as he tried to deny it, he was the Chosen One. With Ahsoka and Obi-Wan still doubting Anakin's decision and the integrity of the Force wielders, they choose to keep watch from a vantage point above the monastery. Down on the platform below, the father was imparting into Anakin his knowledge to achieve true balance, and after clashing with the father, he found his teachings were much more suited to him than those taught under the Jedi Code. As hours turned into days, the father was growing weaker, and during one of his last planned lessons, the son chose to intervene. Swooping downwards in his avian form, the Darkseid wielder captured Ahsoka and Obi-Wan from their camp and placed them on two stakes outside the monastery. Instead of imploring Anakin to stay, the father allowed Anakin to free the Jedi to see if he had learned his lessons. The father was pleased to see that Anakin did not ignite his lightsaber, but instead approached the two limp bodies and tried to untie them. The Jedi's attempted rescue was soon interrupted by the son, who used the Force to push Anakin against the wall of the monastery and ordered him to bring him the dagger of Mortis. Anakin could sense the selfish desires of the son, and he decided to hide his unlocked powers, then travelled to the cavern to retrieve the dagger, which he had overheard from Anakin's lessons. As the sun glared at Anakin from the mouth of the cavern, Anakin leapt down the various platforms and retrieved the dagger from its invisible mountings. Turning to face the sun, the Jedi saluted him, and igniting his lightsaber, he blasted his way up and out of the cavern to find the father. Having planned for such a moment, the father waited for the presence of the son and passed over the last of his life force to Anakin before falling to the floor. The horrified son was joined by the equally shocked daughter, and together they decided to stop fighting whilst Anakin hid the dagger from their view. Having somewhat restored balance that the father had wanted, Ahsoka and Obi-Wan guided an exhausted Anakin to their ship, and with the Jedi Master flying the ship to prevent any further accidents, they departed from Mortis. The voice of Commander Rex awoke the Jedi from their slumber, and as Ahsoka and Obi-Wan would awaken, they quickly sensed a change from Anakin. Anakin gazed at his hands in disbelief, as he realised the power that he had been entrusted with and unlocked, and it was up to him to decide how balance was achieved. Once the Jedi met the 501st at their rendezvous point, Anakin was still tired from the influx of knowledge and power, but he wanted to ensure that he could control this power, and headed to his quarters in the Venator-class Star Destroyer. Obi-Wan had been searching for Anakin, having missed a report to the Jedi Council, and to his shock, he sees Anakin is meditating. Obi-Wan had tried over and over to get Anakin to meditate, but his former Padawan preferred to repair droids around the temple, and now Anakin was lifting every object in his room. Obi-Wan was now doubting if he and the Jedi had taught Anakin correctly, and after his encounter with Qui-Gon on Mortis, he wondered if he would have been a better master. As the Jedi settled into his own quarters, he also thought about the Jedi Council's reaction to Anakin's powers, and if they now considered Anakin to be dangerous. After returning from wild space and back to Coruscant, Obi-Wan and Ahsoka hadn't realised the extent of Anakin's power surge, as every Jedi they passed in the temple was now staring at Anakin like a Tyranitar had walked in. Once the trio entered the Jedi Council chambers, Anakin felt as small as he had done when he first arrived from Tatooine, as the Jedi Council members glared at him and asked him to tell the Jedi what had happened on Mortis. As Anakin recalled the test of the Chosen One and his teachings under the Father, many of the Jedi looked amazed at the legend of the Ones, but Master Windu was cautious. Like Obi-Wan had feared, the Master of the Order didn't believe that this Father could succeed where the Jedi had failed and control Anakin's emotions. The Jedi Knight could sense the unease in the Karun Master and knew he could annihilate Windu with a mere flick of his wrist, but this would go against what he had learned on Mortis. But for all of Anakin's flaws, Windu valued Anakin's skills as a warrior, and at such a crucial stage in the war, his powers were much needed. Before Anakin's next mission, he had hoped to meet Padme and Supreme Chancellor Palpatine, but when he found Padme at her apartment, she told him that the Chancellor had disappeared. Whilst most in the Senate thought Palpatine was on a diplomatic mission, Padme had seen even the inscrutable Amidala looking concerned, and Anakin was also worried for his mentor. With all attempts at a search being blocked by his guards, Anakin wanted to take matters into his own hands, and sent R2-D2 and C-3PO to the Senate building to find out where Palpatine had gone. Little did he know that Palpatine was actually still on Coruscant. When Anakin had arrived on Coruscant, the Chancellor had been talking to a group of senators in his office, but also had one eye on the return of Anakin, as he hoped to have one of their meetings. So when one of his Coruscant guard reported through a signal in his chair that Anakin's Venator-class Star Destroyer had arrived at the staging area, Palpatine was surprised to sense Anakin from such a distance. As he hid his reaction from the senators, the Sith silently ordered the Coruscant guard to keep track of the Jedi Knight, whilst he concluded the meeting. Once the senators departed, he received reports that other Jedi were taken aback by Anakin's aura, so he entered into his private office from the ceremonial room and searched for his apprentice. The hologram of Count Dooku bowed down to his master, projected from his castle in Sereno, and the Sith had also felt the disturbance in the Force. Sidious ordered Dooku to meet him on Coruscant, and in the meantime, Sidious departed for the Works District. In the abandoned Limerge building, Sidious stored an array of Sith artifacts and relics, but buried amongst these ornate objects was the work of both his master and Darth Tenebrous. Having read about the Sith's notorious history of betrayals, Sidious not only wanted to become the final Sith, but also succeed where his master had failed. The Sith Lord had been searching for a way to transfer his body, and now with Anakin becoming so powerful, this gave him a number of options. Going through his Rolodex of evil allies, he needed someone who could get a sample of Anakin's blood, and the perfect candidate was Cad Bane, the Duras bounty hunter previous experience of infiltrating the temple, having helped Sidious retrieve a holocron, and now his services were needed again. Once the Sith Lord reached out to Bane, the bounty hunter and his faithful droid Todo 360 were both skeptical about the mission, as the temple's security had been increased after their previous heist. But after insisting on doubling his credits for the mission, Bane would agree upon a deal. Rather than infiltrate the temple as Sidious suggested, Bane decided to lure the Jedi into the open, and upon arriving on Coruscant, in his starfighter known as the Xanadu's Blood, he dispatched a number of DRK-1 probe droids across the planet. Bane would soon receive images of Anakin running through the Works District, and was soon onto the location of the Jedi Knight by surveying the alleyways from the rooftops. As Anakin stopped at a crossroads, Bane seized this moment and unleashed his whipcord from his gauntlet, but expecting to find a struggling Anakin, he found himself trapped by his own cord. Bane found Anakin standing over him, and he realised that it had been a trap. As the 501st Legion took Bane to the Central Detention Centre, Sidious had seen the chase from the shadows, and having just witnessed a mere morsel of Anakin's new power, he would need to be more intelligent to secure the Chosen One. As Anakin's silhouette disappeared from the dark alleyway, Sidious travelled to an abandoned warehouse, which was located in the lower levels of the underworld, and there the Sith met with his apprentice. The failure of Cad Bane all but confirmed the concerns for the Sith, and now Dooku could sense that Sidious wanted Anakin. The Sith Lord assured Dooku that he would have his place in his empire after the war, but were they to avoid their destruction, Sidious now needed something more than Order 66. Knowing they would now struggle to directly get to Anakin, the Sith now decided to hurt those around him. After all, compassion was Anakin's greatest weakness. Returning to a secret archive, the Sith opted to invade the mind of one Padme Amidala, as the Sith Lord would see her more often than a Jedi. The ritual was used as early as the Great Hyperspace War, with the Sith sat out Keto using the mind-controlling magic to eliminate resistance on Kirek, but now the Sith would use the ability on just one individual. As Padme was in her apartment on the other side of the planet, the two Sith focused their minds to plant doubtful thoughts towards Anakin and the Jedi. In one of the many quarters of the Jedi Temple, Anakin was performing his new hobby of meditation when he felt a slight ripple in the Force. The Jedi turned to Ahsoka, who was also meditating, but she had sensed nothing. Getting back to his feet, he used a technique he learned on Mortis and cast ripples of his own into the Force, and it allowed him to sense changes in beings around him. The faintest of signals emitted from the outer reaches of the concentric circles, and he could sense the distinct presence of Padme Amidala. The Jedi Knight leapt to his feet and rushed out of the Jedi Temple in a blur, taking his speeder to the veranda of Padme's apartment. The Senator is surprised to see Anakin, and the Jedi Knight tells her about everything on Mortis, then his heightened senses in the Force. As the sunset turned to night, Anakin still felt uneasy about these waves in the Force, as Padme assured him it was merely the stress of the war, but soon these sensations turned to alarm. Padme could see Anakin's face turn to battle mode, and descending the turbo lift of the Senate apartment complex, the lift suddenly stopped. The Jedi and Senator ricocheted off of the clary crystalline interior of the lift, and around the city, the lights started to flicker then disappear. Residents were reminded of the recent attack on the power grid, and as residents scrambled to find light, a group of senators led by Palpatine were moved to the 500 Republica, whilst Republic engineers moved to restore power. Elsewhere in the Federal District, the scenes were much more chaotic. The power cut was exploited by those in the Republic's detention center, and everyone from bounty hunters to assassins were breaking free and causing chaos in the streets. The likes of Boba Fett, Aurra Sing and Bossk all made their way to the underworld to look for transport off of Coruscant, as others were pursued by clone troopers. Jedi such as Quinlan Vos were helping the investigators, but Anakin sensed something more sinister was at play. The Jedi returned to his speeder, but rather than race through the streets, he scanned from the skies like a predator, and he spotted one area near the recently repaired power grid. Amongst the wreckage was a conveniently placed head of a obi-wan battle droid, and Anakin pulled the head towards him, but as it flicked past the cable, the head exploded to cause yet more destruction. The darkness in the industrial area was soon illuminated by the flashing lights of Coruscant police gunships. As he was surrounded by the Coruscant Underworld Police and clone shock troopers, the Jedi Knight realised that he had been framed, and he could either resist or let events unfold. Anakin placed his faith in the Force, and allowed himself to be placed into military custody. As he was transported into the Republic gunship, then taken to the Republic Center for Military Operations, he began to make a list of candidates who were behind this attack. Whilst Dooku and the Separatists seemed the most obvious candidate, he now believed that the faint ripple in the Force surrounding Padme was connected to this latest attack, and the work of a mysterious Sith Lord more powerful than Dooku. Anakin remained in a temporary cell guarded by laser gates, but by the following day, the investigators could not find any evidence of Anakin's involvement, so he returned to the Senate building to check on the health of the senators. Whilst they had survived unscathed, a second attack in only a few months was leading to protests outside of the building, and questions were being asked of the Jedi and the Republic Army. On his return to the Jedi Temple, Anakin is summoned to the Jedi Communication Chamber, and he is given his next mission to Lola Sayu. Anakin wanted to stay on Coruscant to protect Padme from further attacks, and to pursue the one person who might know the identity of the attacker, who was the recently deposed Sith assassin Asajj Ventress. As Anakin, Obi-Wan and the clones prepared for the mission, Anakin knows the significance of rescuing Master Peel, so he decides to delegate his personal mission to Ahsoka. While she wanted to go to the dangerous Citadel, the Togruta had an old score to settle with Ventress, so she reluctantly accepted to remain on Coruscant. As Anakin was lowered for carbonite freezing, he looked at the other troops for this mission, and he couldn't help but feel like it was deliberately shifted from Coruscant. Like the father had warned him, his new power was making him paranoid with saving everyone, and he reminded himself that he must retain balance. But as the Jedi bypassed the Citadel security, his Padawan was wondering why she had been asked to go on a wild banter chase. Ahsoka knew that Padme was capable of defending herself, having survived the attack from Aurra Sing, and even with the escape of the bounty hunters, Ahsoka thought Anakin was just being cautious. The Togruta still decided to carry out her master's request, as she had no intentions of studying in the Jedi archives, and she made her way to the Senate office building. When she entered into Padme's office, the Senate had been expecting Ahsoka, and she told her that she was safe, with Captain Typho and her trusty Naboo royal guards. A slightly reassured Ahsoka then shared details of Anakin's secret mission, and Padme suggested she should go to the Jedi archives and retrace the last steps of Asajj Ventress. The Padawan grumbled at going to the archives, so she decided to seek out the one person she could trust, who was the Kossian Jedi Master Terra Sinube. With his vast knowledge of the criminal underworld, Ahsoka was hoping for his help again, and once more the Jedi asked her to be patient. Instead of accessing his vast database of Coruscant's underworld, the Jedi decides to use his droid M5BZ to obtain a record of the Dathomir's history and movements. After discovering Ventress's history with the Jedi and her master Kai Narek, then her apprenticeship under Dooku and the Separatists, the two Jedi travel to Coruscant's spaceport, and with the help of the clones of the port authorities, they access the Republic database for journeys across their ports, and they piece together the last movements of Ventress. After Obi-Wan and Anakin had encountered Ventress above Toydaria, the former Sith assassin fell down to the planet, and using a junk ship, she travelled from the mid-rim to wild space, and then to the core. Master Sinube speculated that she lost her way, and inevitably this would lead her back home to Dathomir. Whilst the Jedi looked for a way off of the planet, the strike team over Lola Sayu had successfully made their landing, and were looking for a way into the Citadel. With the entrance guarded by electromines, Anakin disagrees with Obi-Wan's plan, and instead, he decides to use the Force to lift the entire team up to the entry point. Seeing two super battle droids patrolling the corridors, he crushes both of them, and fires their remains into the laser gate controls to allow the Jedi into the Citadel. With Anakin still reluctant to show his power to all but Obi-Wan and Rex, he waited for the team to enter the maze of corridors before receiving the signal from Obi-Wan. Anakin looked up at the central control tower and channeled the Force through his body to turn into a Relta-like avian creature, then flew to the summit. As the Warden Ozzy Sobek was talking to Count Dooku and looking at the security cameras in the corridors, Anakin transformed back to human form and threw his lightsaber in a wide arc. The glass around the tower shattered, and Anakin diverted these shards into the commando droids and Sobek, leaving only the hologram of Dooku. The Sith was almost impressed by Anakin's display of power, but before he could taunt the Jedi further, Anakin crushed the console and demagnetized the area so the strike team could kill the other droids. As the strike team completed their successful mission in retrieving the Nexus route coordinates, Ahsoka and Master Sinube had managed to sneak aboard a freighter to Corellia. The Jedi then boarded a rusty salvage ship and made their way to the rundown port on Dathomir, emerging in a cloud of red mist. Having to walk to the Nightsister fortress was no obstacle for the Jedi, but they soon were faced by a small legion of Nightsisters, pointing their array of energy bows and other weapons in their faces. Upon their request to see Asajj Ventress, Mother Taus imparted through the Nightsisters, and using the magical eye core of the planet, she created a crystal ball to see the events of the future. With the arrival of these two Jedi, the visions had changed to those of war, and in a bid to protect her clan, she dismissed the two Jedi from her sight. Master Sinube did not see this as a sign of failure, but proved that Ventress was hiding amongst the clan. But when they returned to the spaceport, the entire place was ablaze, including their ship. The sound of a dreadnought caused tremors across the area, and Master Sinube deduced that the Jedi must have been tracked, bringing their war to Dathomir. Back on Coruscant, the Jedi strike team had returned from their successful mission, and Anakin wasted no time in seeing Padme, but when he heard about Ahsoka's pursuit of Ventress, Anakin was mortified at what he had done. The Jedi Knight could not regret leaving Coruscant, as he now had to find his missing Padawan. The only question was how. Anakin frantically paced from the front to the back of Padme's apartment, as he tried to think of a way to retrieve Ahsoka. With his mission being a personal one, he knew that he couldn't ask for the help of the Council, so returning to the Jedi Temple, he heads to the quarters of his old master. Whether by luck or fate, Obi-Wan is in his quarters with the Keldor Master Plo Koon, and the look of concern on Anakin's face was all the Jedi Masters needed. The Jedi Knight explained the predicament that he had placed upon Ahsoka, and the Jedi Masters did not look surprised. Their thoughts are interrupted by the astromech droid R787, who Anakin knew belonged to Ahsoka, and in its droid speak, Anakin translated that Ahsoka had been in the archives. Anakin was immediately suspicious, knowing his Padawan's hatred for the place, so when he led the 3 Jedi to the archives, he was shocked that Jocasta Nu confirmed Ahsoka had been studying with Terra Sanube. The Jedi looked at each other with concern, knowing how familiar the Kossian Master was with the underworld, but with no other leads, that would have to be their next destination. With the help of Captain Rex, the Jedi secretly used a low-altitude assault gunship from the military base, and they travelled below the surface of Coruscant. The well-disguised mix of escaped convicts and low-life criminals are no match for Anakin's powers, and the Jedi can sense the lower levels are crawling with mischief, but what his focus is upon was the Moshi Bar, previously visited by Ahsoka and Plo Koon. Obi-Wan decides that the Jedi needed to be subtle, so with the other 2 Jedi waiting outside, Obi-Wan asks for a drink, whilst listening to the seedy characters around him. On this particular evening, the bar was home to a number of bounty hunters and a squad of wayward clones, and with the help of an oral amplifier, Obi-Wan overheard a description of the 2 missing Jedi. The Jedi Master quietly left the bar without causing a riot, and were about to head for the spaceport when the wall-mounted view screen beside a billboard flashed above them. The breaking HoloNet news was that there were rumblings in the Dathomir system, and before the report had even finished, Anakin was sprinting back to the gunship. As with the mission to Lola Sayu, Plo Koon served as emergency reinforcement for the 2 Jedi, and with a small group of the 501st Legion, Anakin and Obi-Wan take the Twilight to Dathomir. The team were constantly monitoring the airways for any sign of the missing Jedi, but the only update was the battle being ignited by the Separatists. When the Jedi eventually reached the skies of Dathomir, Anakin could sense the presence of his Padawan, but also a great darkness, which dangled over the battle like a giant shadow. The rusty Twilight was taking hits from all sides, through shrapnel generated by the Separatist dreadnought, and Obi-Wan took over the controls of the ship, whilst Anakin tried to stabilise it with the Force. Instead of providing a clearance code to get past the blockade, the Jedi fall through the defences, and the OM battle droids assumed that those inside were already dead. Little did they know that Anakin had done this on purpose, and once they left the detection of the dreadnought, R2-D2 set the destination for an uninhabited swamp. With Anakin's use of the Force, he prevents a total crash of the Twilight, but the impact forces Longshot and Charger to stay behind and repair the ship. The small team did not need Anakin's powers to find the missing Jedi, and utilising R2-D2's full spectrum transceiver, they detect activity 3 clicks south of their location. Anakin and Rex led the squad through the mist, and the sound of blaster fire and Ichor energy grew louder, until they started to see the bodies of battle droids and Nightsisters across the ground. Hidden beneath a gravethorn, Anakin's heart soared to the skies as he saw Ahsoka and Master Sanube seeking refuge, and he whistled to attract their attention. Their attempts to wave back were cut short, as the burial pod above their heads was broken by a stray blaster bolt, and a Nightsister zombie started crawling over the Jedi. The reinforcements took this as a sign to enter the battle, and though the Nightsisters would not admit it, they were grateful for the Jedi's intervention. The familiar coughing of Grievous from the centre of the fortress was Obi-Wan's cue to leave the team, and this left Anakin to protect the clan and find Ventress. The exiled Sith assassin was not difficult to find, as she was crawling on the floor from her attempt to fight the cyborg, and Anakin lifted her to the heart of the village, where the old Daka could perform her healing magics. This left the Jedi Knight free to join the battle, and glancing at his master dueling his old foe, Anakin thought he would join in, and he squeezed Grievous's organs so they merged into one unit, leaving Obi-Wan to impale his blue blade into Grievous. Without their general, the battle droids started to look out of sequence, and the organised Nightsisters picked off their opposition. In the absence of Grievous, the OM command droid ordered for the army to retreat, and in the command centre, Dooku was surprised to see the yellow-marked droid instead of the cyborg. What should have been a routine massacre for the cyborg, thanks to one of the escaped bounty hunters tracking the 2 Jedi, had turned into a catastrophic disaster, and now he had the unenviable task of reporting this to Sidious. The 00M command droid was lucky to still be standing, and the same could be said for Sarge Ventress. The Dathomirian had come out second best against Grievous, but with the help of old Daka, she eventually awoke in an ornate tent, wondering how she had got there. The tent was soon filled with 3 more occupants, who were Anakin, Obi-Wan and Ahsoka, and her face turned to annoyance at the sight of the Jedi. The panic of almost losing his Padawan had faded from Anakin, and she politely asked Ventress if she knew anything about the attack on Coruscant or the mind probe on Senator Amidala. Now they had a common enemy. Ventress said she did not know the man beneath the hood, only that he was referred to as Darth Sidious, and for Obi-Wan Kenobi this brought back memories of his time on Geonosis and under a containment field talking to Count Dooku. Perhaps he had misunderstood Dooku, and he might have been telling the truth. Anakin knew that Ventress was hiding more than they were being told, but Obi-Wan decided that she had suffered enough, and they made their way back to the ship. Captain Rex approached the Jedi and asked them to go to the holoprojector as there was a message from Coruscant. The Jedi started to play the message, and to the shock of the Jedi, each senator was being prodded by an electrostaff, and at the end of the images, the senator transformed to Palpatine, who was begging to be freed. Obi-Wan stroked his beard and knew this was a trap, and as he looked at Anakin, he could see the strategic cogs turning in Anakin's mind. The Jedi knew that this Darth Sidious was holding them hostage, but he also now knew that the Sith were targeting him for his powers, so it was time to put everything he had learned on Mortis to use. Charger and Longshot had successfully completed the repairs on the Twilight, and the small team returned to Coruscant with Ventress, who had unfinished business with their traitorous masters. Even with Anakin modifying the hyperdrive, the Jedi arrived several days later to their home planet Another Jedi, and when they exited hyperspace, they were stunned at the sight. The normally luminous Coruscant was now blanketed by swirling wormholes, and it was as if life was being drawn away. Anakin had to stop himself convulsing at the thought of the lives that could be lost, including Padme, and instead refocused to order Rex to steer the ship closer. Even the loyal clone had second thoughts, but trusted his general to tilt the controls forward until Anakin could feel its source. With its force cloak removed, Anakin now sensed that his so-called friend Palpatine was the one responsible for this monstrosity. With a renewed determination, Anakin dismissed the protests of the Jedi and stepped outside of the ship and leapt down into one of the wormholes. The Jedi's body felt like it was being pulled from all directions, but his immense control of the Force slowed the progress to a manageable speed until he fell through the skies. The dark and eerie atmosphere was soon punctured by the screams of Anakin as he fell down and cushioned by the Force. He looked around to see a variety of weird floating objects in Bacta tanks. As he examined a floating hand, the cackle of Palpatine reverberated across the area, and Anakin turned to face his former mentor. The Sith Lord told the Jedi that there was nothing left for him in the galaxy, and now he should take his place by his side. Anakin smirked when he saw Dooku looking betrayed at Palpatine's words, and when the apprentice ignited his curved-hilted lightsaber, Anakin did not even bother to ignite his own. The Jedi directed a flash of yellow-coloured energy at Dooku, and the Sith was sent tumbling to the floor, with his robe singed and his life fading. Palpatine laughed again and told Anakin that he would make for a better apprentice, but the Jedi ignored these words. The Jedi sensed the Sith Lord was growing overconfident and out of control, and when the Sith cast his infamous lightning attack, Anakin seized the moment. Catching the bright white light in his hands, he turned it into a white cloud of smoke, and whilst Palpatine was surprised, Anakin directed Dooku's stricken lightsaber into Palpatine's head. Plumes of black acrid smoke rose from his surroundings, but Anakin stumbled out of the curious complex to look at the stars. The Jedi Knight had no idea what planet he was on, or even if there was a way back, but what he did know was that he had protected the power of the Ones and saved the galaxy.